Hello, puppies and kittens. I'm speaking with Mr. V, who says that he has published a peer reviewed physics paper with a complete, consistent prehistory of the Big Bang with no miracles, gaps, singularities, or even quantum gravitational speculations. Now, if you'd like to read that paper, I have the link below. And Mr. V, I could read the paper. I tried started to, and realized, well, this is a physics paper, so I'm not going to be able to contribute much to it. So let's just have you explain it, shall we?
Sure. So the basic idea, I have a general interest in debunking miracles, especially the very important ones, like the resurrection of Jesus. I translated a major foreign work about this one. You can read it about on Wikipedia. Let me just say the name if you want to read about it. It's called The Gospel of Afranius, Afranius. Where I'm from, after this work came out, nobody has ever tried to prove the resurrection of Jesus again. And no people like Craig or Licona, where I'm from, they existed before this paper came out. This work came out, and they did not exist after. And this work was also praised in Nature, the famous journal. So I translated it, and I hope to replicate the same effects in the West. That's one thing. The even more important thing, obviously, is addressing the question of what happened before the Big Bang. So here, my personal view, I am an eternalist. Philosophically, I believe that time is always passing from the past to the future, like it does now. There are no special moments, no special beginning. There was always 1 second before. Again, it's a personal philosophical opinion, if you will. But how to understand it pertaining to the Big Bang? Well, yeah, I'm going to be doing a philosophical introduction. So far, what I'm thinking is that Big Bang is like a nuclear explosion, basically. Of course, it's different, and it's not exactly an explosion because the plasma is not expanding in space, but with space. But the basic idea is this. When we're talking about things like 10 to the 24th after the Big Bang and so on, what we're really talking about is the same things, and when we're analyzing a nuclear bomb explosion, that we need to talk about nanoseconds, right? To adequately explain what's happening during a nuclear explosion, we need to talk in terms of nanoseconds. But that doesn't mean the nuclear bomb did not exist 1 second before that.
Okay, so I'm a little confused. You mentioned that you're not using any quantum gravity speculations, and one of the things that throws me off about that is that I've seen presentations by a number of different physicists, and I've been assured over and over again that until we have a quantum gravity model, then we're not really going to know that anything that we do in classical physics breaks down when we get toward the Big Bang.
This is the issue. We need to use some sort of physical miracle, usually. And every time we try to explain what happened before the Big Bang, like here's the easy explanation, easy possibility that's frequently suggested, that our universe could have originated from the quantum foam bubble. That's one possibility. And in turn, that quantum foam, by the way, we can also make it eternal, this idea. It could have originated from an empty space that was just always there, okay? So here's by the way, here's another easy, as far as if we're assuming things like these kind of speculatory ideas, like quantum foam, origin of spaces from little bubbles, that's Vilenkin's idea, we can just say that there was an empty space that was just there forever, nothing can happen to it. It was forming at the microscopic level, quantum foaming, and one of those bubbles became our universe. We can say something like that. Here's another one that uses quantum speculations. We can say that the space was contracting, the universe was contracting before it started expanding, but to ensure the stability of that contraction, we need to assume that it was empty, and most importantly, it was 2 plus 1 dimensional. It wasn't 3 dimensional, 3 dimensions of space, 1 dimension of time like it is now. It has to be 2 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. This is a so-called Milne universe, probably compactified. And in that case, the vacuum is rigid. In 2 plus 1 dimensions, there is no gravitational waves, no gravitons. It's a very famous result. And that's why physicists are interested in the so-called BTZ black hole, because even despite there are no gravitons, there's still gravity, which is so that's why people try to do quantum gravity in 2 dimensions. But the basic idea is that since the vacuum is rigid, this process is stable in eternity. Otherwise, there's blue shifting and it's unstable. Religious apologists will immediately point out that they could have been contracting because of all the instabilities, to which I can remark that that's true in 3 dimensions, but not in 2 plus 1 dimension. Anyway, the problem is, once it gets contracted, right, there's this transition period where the 2 plus 1 dimensional space needs to become our 3-dimensional universe. And that requires quantum gravitational speculations, like, for example, space atoms. One popular idea, like in the loop quantum gravity, is that there are space atoms, of which the space consists, like matter consists of regular atoms, and that you can imagine this transition being like a thin solid film melting into a liquid voluminous droplet, consisting of space atoms in both cases. So again, it's a hand wave. And it's when somebody's trying to shut up apologists, it's preferable to not have any hand waves like that. This is still consistent. It is still eternal, but you still need to assume on face that there is some magic, semi-magic quantum gravitational mechanism that we completely don't understand yet. So the interesting thing to do is to try to not assume anything like that. Those quantum space atoms or quantum foam, all those things, just try to get away try to make a eternal consistent model without anything like that. It's logically preferable because you're making less assumptions. So there's less.
I am so confused. So it would some physicists insist that we know that classical mechanics is not applicable here, that the universe is quantum and that we need a quantum model of gravitation.
Sure,
and you're saying, and I realize we don't have yet a quantum model of gravity. So, I mean, I'm being told that that's what's necessary. And you're saying that that's just speculation and you're calling it magic.
Oh, well, we definitely need some sort of quantum gravity, unless people like Jonathan Oppenheimer, who says that gravity is not quantum at all. You can look him up. He has a famous interview in the Quantum magazine, Jonathan Oppenheimer, if I'm not mistaken, who simply thinks that space-time is essentially classical and there's never going to be a quantum gravity period. But that's only one opinion. I'm not saying that that's true.
Of course, okay, and then let's cover yourself also. Where you've published, this is a peer-reviewed journal that you published too?
Yeah, this is a peer-reviewed journal. It's a small one. It's about 10 years old. I originally submitted it to another journal where it was rejected because the peer reviewer wasn't even realizing that there are very tight consistency constraints on what is possible for an eternal model. So, for example, Alex Vilenkin and Audrey Metheny and Anthony Aguirre and I don't remember his first name, Harris, wrote very many tight results that the apologists love to quote that actually do constrain what is possible in the past eternal universe. And apparently, some people don't quite realize how tight those constraints are. For example, I submitted to another journal, and the reviewer said that it's not of interest because there's already a classical eternal model, namely the emergent universe of, like the cosmic egg, emergent universe of Ellis, George Ellis and others. But the people I mentioned prove that it's inconsistent in two different ways. So the reviewer was wrong, and I tried to submit it to another journal, and it worked. So this is a cutting edge kind of thing.
Okay, when you mentioned Vilenkin, he's the author of the what was it? I just had it up here. Vilenkin's notion of quantum tunneling.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so everything in your model, there's no quantum tunneling, there's no quantum anything. You're doing everything by classical mechanics.
Exactly. Not mechanics, classical physics, because this includes general relativity, but no.
Yes.
No quantum. Yes.
Okay. So, and what about your accolades yourself? Are you a physicist, sir?
I have a master's of arts in mathematics. I'm a mathematician. I have publications and citations. When I studied at MIT, I also took some physics courses, and it's very easy to be relatively okay with physics when you're a mathematician.
Okay.
It's not far.
So I've seen a whole lot of people commenting on this. Many of them philosophers, and of course many physicists, but also a lot of mathematicians as well. So, okay, fine. So you're in the class of you're one of the three.
Okay.
All right. So let's go ahead with the explanation, which is going over my head entirely, and you're coming at it from the wrong direction. I was a fan of the notion that I don't know that anybody's ever proposed this, but I always liked the idea. Sagan's explanation of what happens when a three-dimensional being walks through a two-dimensional, like say an MRI, when you have the two-dimensional cutaway of the being. Now, you know that you came from somewhere, but when you go through that field, it looks as if you appeared out of nowhere, and then you change states constantly until you disappear entirely. But it's not actually out of nothing. So, I mean, one of the things that and he used that to explain how to explain 3 dimensions to a 2-dimensional society, for example. And of course, this was to illustrate for us how difficult it would be for us to understand a 4th spatial dimension. So I always liked the idea of cosmic inflation being similar to a 4th spatial dimension flooding into and filling up 3-dimensional space-time. Not that that's an actual theory anybody's ever promoted. It's just an idea that hit me with some affinity. So try to explain to somebody who's not at all into physics. I don't know the fuck I'm talking about. So try to simplify this as much as you can.
What you're saying is actually similar to one of the theories that was proposed. It's called the ekpyrotic brane cosmology, where you have the whole space as a brane in a higher 4-dimensional, 4+1 dimensional space.
And by brane, you're spelling that BRANE, right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Like membrane without mem.
Okay.
Yes. So, and this was also disproven to be impossible to go on forever by Veklych, by the way. So there was an idea that how it's pretty much, it's actually not far from what you were saying. There's a much more formalized model, and this also doesn't square with the Barde-Guth-Veklych theory. Unfortunately, it's really
well the thing when you bring up brains, now you're linking that into string theory, right? So that
it's also going from the string theory, which is again very far beyond classical physics. So again, it's just
But is string theory still supported at all? I was under the impression that it
has no proof. It's not
okay.
It's consistent, but it has no experimental proof whatsoever, unfortunately.
Okay, so we're putting string theory entirely, just like the model I just proposed. We're putting both of those in the closet of pure speculation. Therefore, right, if you can't be indicated or vindicated, verified or falsified, it's not supported by any evidence. There's no way to test it, whether it's right or wrong. Then it offers no possible value, can't contribute to the sum of human knowledge. Therefore, it's not interesting. Let's talk about something we can prove.
And the same exact comment, thank you very much, can be said about the 2 models I just gave, because they are not fine-tuned, but on the flip side, they have no predictions. So if universe came out of a quantum form bubble, or the universe came out of this empty contracting 2-dimensional space, there is nothing in the universe now that you can use to verify or disverify that. And there's no meaningful information that you can work with from here. It's a dead end. On the other hand,
okay.
you have a classical model where you can actually trace everything with math, like actually trace everything without hand waves. Then you have some chances of being able to ask the questions of how do we get to prove this, what meaningful consequences it has, and so on.
Okay, so the one more moment of clarification, because as I said, this is obviously over my head. I listened to Lawrence Krauss explaining a universe from nothing, and I remember that he said at some point that this is very confusing for some people. And so I told him after the presentation, I said, "You're right. You explained nothing, and now I understand nothing."
The problem with these universe from nothing ideas. Well, let's say the universes can really pop up from nothing. Though I personally am unlike Krauss and like Lee Smolin, for example, I'm inclined to think that time is a very serious thing to be taken. So
let me also clarify that when physicists say from nothing, they're literally not saying nothing. They're talking about what is it? A quantum field fluctuation?
It is a fluctuation of space itself. It's a quantum gravitational fluctuation. That's what they're talking about.
Very good. So he was being a bit facetious in saying a universe from nothing. That is not actually what that means. And I've heard other people will commonly say from nothing, knowing that the public are going to understand that the public are going to think that they're talking about from nothing, but they're actually not. And the way I understand it, I've seen the illustrations, the animations, and everything. And if I didn't have those, I wouldn't understand what the hell they're talking about. I have to see the illustration and make it work in my head. But first of all, we have a pulsating model, as I understand it, versus a what is it? An emergent model where you have an eternal singularity. The eternal or the singularity always existed, and therefore, whatever reason inflation began. Or you have a mirrored effect where you have and there's two or three different versions of this, like the big bounce. You have like a big crunch that going into the Big Bang, so that you have past eternal space where the arrow of time is pointing away from entropy, and then it comes into this crunch, this condensation, or condension. That's completely wrong word. I'm found it sounding stupid. This is an okay subject to sound stupid about. Nobody understands it, so far as I know. So you get down to this infinitesimal point where you then the arrow of time directs the other way. Where now it's pointing toward entropy, and now you have a Big Bang from that, and you can have a situation where there can be a later contraction, so a Big Bang, big crunch, kind of a pulsation kind of thing, which can go on forever and ever.
So the idea is, the problem is precisely as you mentioned, entropy and the arrow of time. If you assume things like the arrow of time can point in any direction you want, in other words, that the second law of thermodynamics can be violated, then yes, but you can also argue that the point where the entropy is the lowest, and from which it points in all the directions, is the beginning. It's the beginning of two universes at the same time. The one in the one direction of time and the one in the other direction of time. So that's not very nice. Besides, the very idea that you can violate the second law of thermodynamics by any sort of tricks is not very dubious, to put it mildly.
Okay, so rather than trying to explain what I've read from a number of different people, and this is not one option. What I was just describing, this was presented as this alternating physical polarity, or the Big Bang, big crunch. There was a number of different models that had the kind of the same effect. So are you going with a one-time past eternal singularity? Is that what you're working from?
No singularities. That's also important.
No singularity.
No singularity.
Interesting. Okay, so help me.
Yes. So first of all, with the Big Bang, Big Crunch, and there is another similar idea where the universe is a life cycle, right? This is the kind of a life cycle idea. Another very similar idea, well, it's not really similar, but it has the same similarity of the universe having a life cycle, is the one by Lee Smolin and Nikodem Poplavsky, where the universe originates in a black hole, right, from in an older universe, and that universe, older universe, also originated in a black hole, even the third universe, and so on and so on. Well, that doesn't work either. All of these things, as long as we don't have any entropy reversal, whether we shouldn't have any entropy reversal, are prohibited by the Borda-Guth-Vilenki theorem. You can prove that the universe expands on average with all these things, and therefore, by the theorem, it cannot be complete into the past. There is a boundary or a singularity that's there and that cannot be erased, and nobody knows what behind it. Sometimes it's not even consistent to describe what happens behind it. So that's a problem. All these models where the universe is a life cycle, like from the big black hole that produces black holes, universes in a black hole, and so on, or the one which is Big Bang, Big Crunch, they cannot be going eternally into the past. Now, there is another model. It's the emergent universe. It's not actually a singularity. It was proposed by George Ellis. Basically, the idea is that there is a little cosmic egg, like a closed universe, like a sphere, right? Only obviously high dimensional version. It just sits there, and then it starts expanding, and there we have ours. But
is that closer to the Hartle-Hawking model?
No. Hartle-Hawking also has a beginning. So this one doesn't have a beginning. It just sits there for like the first half of eternity. The numbers.
You're saying the Hartle-Hawking model has a beginning?
Yes, it does.
I've seen presentations explaining how it does not.
Well, it has the original state. It has the original. Okay, it's like a chess game. Okay, we have the original state that is fixed, and then Stephen Hawking even elaborated like the ideas of the Stephen Hawking's latest book on the origin of time. Right. In informal terms, it works like this: you have a chessboard, right? You have an original position where everything is possible, and then you start making moves, and very quickly the game becomes very specific. But this is the original condition of all possibilities, and then it collapses by the wave function collapses, certain collapse into some more specific reality. That's the basic idea. So
Okay, so I'm just so confused because when I'm watching physicists explain
yes,
how there's a couple of eternal models like Sean Carroll's quantum eternal theorem
it has a boundary.
and the Hartle-Hawking model, and that these don't have a beginning, and then you turn around and tell me that it does.
This is the
So
problem with the Aguirre with the Carl Chen model. There is a specific boundary surface such that the universe is going in one direction from it and in the other direction. The entropy is
and is that why are they saying then that it doesn't have a beginning? Are they talking about an eternal
boundary.
singularity?
The beginning is a very flexible word. We have a boundary here. The better word to describe
Okay,
it is
so
boundary.
we're all accepting that inflation has a beginning,
Yes,
but that's not the creation of the universe. The material energy, the first
exactly.
law of thermodynamics, these remain intact.
It doesn't have to be exactly. That's the point.
Okay.
So for example, so to go back to again Hartle-Hawking model, it does have a beginning in time. It has the moment of time before there was no time. If you yes, like that, you can put this is the most
So this is one in which the singularity is eternal.
no, that's not the one. That's the model by Ellis,
So
George Ellis.
is there a time before the singularity?
In George Ellis's model, there is no singularity. There is only a little thing, but it's not singular.
But in a Hartle-Hawking model, is there a time before the singularity?
There is a first time. So the first time
Is that before the singularity?
it doesn't have a singularity. It has no
The
boundary.
Hartle-Hawking model has no singularity?
It has no boundary. Yeah, that's the no boundary proposal. That's why it's called
Okay.
the boundary proposal.
All right, help me out with that then. I hope somebody else watching is as confused as I am because I'm really embarrassed right now. So go ahead.
This is the thing why I try to avoid the quantum gravity, because it is confusing. It is extremely confusing. There are hard issues inside the quantum gravity, like the problem of time that has never been resolved yet. Basically, gravity. Yeah, I don't even want to go there. In short, it is a very confusing subject for everybody. There's not
Well, I'll tell you what confuses me. The first thing that confuses me is how we have in chemistry we have the quantum model of the atomic model, and yet we still have to do stoichiometry with whichever one is it. I'm getting them confused now. Bohr's model or Dalton's model. We have to use a different model, an older model of the atom, to do stoichiometry because the quantum model doesn't.
there is a everything. I have to put it this way. Everything is an end in itself. When you're doing programming, right, you have to focus on the commands. You never focus on the how they display it on the screen and stuff like that. You have to think in the terms that are relevant to the situation. So the same with the quantum gravity, or let's say protons. They are made of quarks, right? But it's not
Okay.
useful. Not very useful to try to describe them with quarks. You have to describe them in terms of protons as they are. This major achievement when people try to approximate the measured properties of protons from the principles of particle physics proper, from the principles of quantum chromodynamics, and they always getting worse results than the just measurements do. So
Okay, so you're saying that ultimately there's no need at all for a quantum gravity model, even though other.
I was just going on an aside that
Okay.
unlike Jonathan Oppenheim, who actually believes that there might not be any quantum gravity period, no such thing. The gravity and space-time is simply classical period, and he has developed these theories of how to harmonize them with the quantum mechanics.
Well, what about Sean Carroll, who's insisting that we know that the universe is quantum?
Well, it is true that the universe is quantum. It's just that the space itself,
Both statements can't be true.
they can. Jonathan Oppenheim is one of the people. You should. Yeah, okay. Let me find this out. 1 second. Actually, since
I don't mean to derail. I don't want to.
just 1 second, I have it almost on my fingertips. 1 second.
Okay, I think probably would be best if you can you explain some way that I can wrap my head around. You have a universe with no beginning. You have a universe with no singularity. So let's just get real simple and say, okay, well, we know.
Yep. So my model is the closest one, the closest existing analog is that of George Ellis. So let me describe that one first. And then
Okay.
So that one looks like this. You have a universe that's just a closed sphere, all right? It's just sitting there. Inside of it, there is a rolling scalar field. It's rolling from past eternity. So imagine just like a particle approaching you, approaching from forever until it hits you in the face, right? So it's very easy to imagine. So like, yeah, so somebody flying towards you, and if you look back, it was just flying. And if however far back and far past you look, it was just flying towards you. And eventually it hits you, and then when things start. So my model, but there are several problems. The specific, first of all, this small closed universe has been shown to be unstable quantum gravitationally, if there is such a thing as quantum gravity at all, by Velenkin. If his ideas about tunneling are correct, and these are more conventional, these are the better understood parts of quantum gravity, if you will, because there are equations for that. It's so-called Wheeler-DeWitt equation. There have been a lot of papers that these are, if there is any quantum gravity, this part is pretty certain. These are like things like Hawking radiation. Again, the more clearly understood parts of it. So he proved that this closed thing is not stable. It cannot have existed forever. Then there is problem with the field itself. It's proven that it's unstable to quantum gravitation, not the quantum gravitation, just quantum diffusion. Right? You know that the particles are described by wave functions that spread over time. If there's an electron flying, you cannot predict exactly where it's going to be after a certain time because it has a wave function that's spreading around. So this imagined universe has the same problem.
Let me jump in with another question. Is there ever a point when the wave function didn't exist?
No.
Okay, not just in your model, but is there any model in which the wave function doesn't exist?
It's a good question. Probably there will be in the future, but none that I know of. Good question.
Okay.
It's an interesting question. Yeah, but for example,
all right. So let me try to simplify, because you've just shot way over my head, I think, because I'm not following, and I suspect if I'm not following, a couple of people out there might not be following either. So we have cosmic inflation indicated by galactic redshift. So the universe is expanding, and you don't have any contention with that. The universe is flying apart. So if we were to turn time backwards, then everything starts coming together. And at some point, we have everything coming very together. And this is where physics always lost me, how it all became the same thing. Now, you're saying that being the singularity, and you're saying that we're running the universe backward. We're having everything coming back together again, but it's not coming to a singularity. Help me understand that as we go backward toward the Big Bang. Because in your model, there's still a Big Bang, just not a singularity, right?
It's called the Einstein-Cartan bounce. It's a well understood phenomenon whereby, for example, this is the origin of the Big Bang in the idea where the universe originates in the black.
The Einstein who bounce?
Cartan, Cartan.
CAN. Okay. I'll have to look that up later. Go ahead.
So it's a famous. It's a very slight extension of general relativity. It takes into account spins of particles. General relativity, it's perfectly classical. It's well understood. It's been proposed like 15 years after the general relativity itself, and it's been around for 100 years. So it belongs to classical physics, and there's been many models with that. So this is as much as I need for my theoretical package. Instead of quantum gravity, just this mild extension. And it allows you to avoid singularity when the density gets really high. When the density gets really high, things become repulsive according to Einstein-Cartan theory. Well,
so just another moment of clarification, if I may.
What?
So we're talking about something that on a Cartesian coordinate system, we're basically describing an asymptote, right? What the classical concept of the singularity is where we would have an asymptote, where it moves on into physical infinities. The singularity itself is made of infinities. Yes?
Yeah, so it's extrapolation. It's an extrapolation. Okay. Yeah. But
so how do you avoid that asymptote?
Exactly. Extrapolation. So short time before the supposed singularity, that's not just me, that's the general idea of Einstein-Cartan bounce. Short time before the singularity, when the density is really, really high, but very, very much below the Planck density yet. So the quantum gravity is not relevant. Due to the spin repulsion of the spins of elementary particles, the matter, the universe, the contraction reverses into expansion. Or if you play it backwards, do the same situation. You get the same situation. The gravity becomes repulsive again. So, in other words, it's the same of spins of particles is the same reason you cannot things resist being compressed. Regular things like tables and chairs resist being compressed, right? You see them bounce. Well, according to Einstein-Cartan theory, related things happen when you compress matter to very, very high densities. They're also due to spins, though the mechanism is different. In other words, at some point, unlike in general relativity and Einstein-Cartan theory, at some point when the matter is really compressed, it starts pushing back again. So things just do not collapse to singularities, period. They never do.
Okay, now this is different than the arrow of time pointing away toward entropy or away from entropy, but that the effect is still the same.
Yeah.
You still have that hourglass configuration that the Big Bang, Big Crunch, that pulsation that we described earlier. That's still the same effect.
Closer. It's
it becomes so dense that gravity becomes repulsive. Is it only repulsive because of the density and the spin?
Yes, that's exactly precisely yes. As long as
so you have everything coming together, and then in coming together, it creates this other effect, this spin, and which results in a bounce, and that still traveling time backwards. What's preceding that?
Yes.
Well,
excellent question. So here's what we get. You cannot simply have it contracting before that. So this is the catch. You cannot simply have it contracting before that because that is unstable. If you extrapolate it to the infinity, you have all sorts of problems. Either you have big bangs and big crunches, which is proven not going on forever, or if you have just a single contraction, then the conditions for it to be stable in eternity are extremely tight. As I said, it's only possible if there is nothing in it to begin with, and furthermore, it has to be two-dimensional, not three-dimensional space like the one we live in. So it is possible, but not in this scenario, where there's a lot of matter. So you have to be more creative. You have to have something prehistory that is fancier than that. And here's what I came up with. Apparently, it's completely original. Instead of this being just a contraction, right? Imagine that we have a universe shaped like a tube, like a surface of a tube, but in 3 dimensions. So imagine surface of a tube, right? If you go around it, you come back. But if you go left or right, you don't come back. So it's infinite in 1 dimension and finite in the other dimension.
Yeah.
Right? And along this tube, you have matter moving with light speed, left to right, and another wave right to left. And when they finally collide, that's when you get that density, and that's when after which you get the Big Bang expansion. That's a very, very natural explanation. So instead of it simply contracting, which is inconsistent if you extrapolate it into eternity, we have a more fancy setup where you have a universe shaped like a tube, okay? Roughly speaking, that's the idea, in which you have one matter wave traveling left to right, another one traveling right to left, like 2 trains on the same railroad track going head to head until they collide. And when they finally collide, that's when you get this density, and that's when the Big Bang starts. And the math checks out, as I show in the article. This is the basic idea. And that can finally work forever in the eternity.
I haven't been this confused since I worked for a company that tried to explain my options for insurance programs. There's just something I can't get a hold of.
So imagine, see, here's the idea. Imagine 2 cargo trains, going full speed, loaded with explosives, on the same railroad track, one towards the other, to a head-on collision, right? At some point, they're going to collide, and you're going to have a big explosion. But if you extrapolate it back in time, they can consistently be just farther away from each other. And if you take it 1 second before, they were just farther away going towards each other. Take it 1 second before, they were just farther away, and so on into eternity. So it's a consistent eternal model. It's pretty fancy. Admittedly, it is pretty fancy.
However, but that helped me out here, because that still says that when you run time forward again, you end up with 2 things loaded with explosives, and the universe is not loaded with explosives.
It's waves of so the universe was very different.
And you're also describing the Big Bang as an explosion, which I understand that the Big Bang is not an explosion
Yes, this is the thing. The plasma is expanding with space rather than in space. In the regular explosion,
with space. Okay.
so in the Big Bang expanding with
So at least you get to a plasma state.
yeah.
You're saying that everything still comes into a plasma state.
Yes. Well, it's more complicated than that because you can also start the inflation. You have two options here, basically. You can directly go to the plasma state, which I haven't explored because it's really technically complicated. I explored the easier option in the paper, which is the beginning of an inflationary period. And if you begin the inflationary period, then that inflation creates the plasma later on when it decays. That's the standard idea. So
Okay. Well, go ahead, please.
yeah. So the basic idea is this. If we simplify it to the Big Bang, so let's suppose what you said before, right? We can have a contraction before it contracts too much and starts expanding again, right? That's simple. That is clear enough, right?
Okay, so everything is crunched down as much as it possibly can and springs back.
Okay. So
Like there's your classical mechanic thing. You just simply don't allow the asymptote. You get to a point where it's got an initial resistance to spring back.
Yes. Okay. So
Okay, so how is this without in your model? Inflation still has a beginning.
inflation itself, yes. So but
Okay.
inflation is very superficial in my model. It's just for
No, but that's fine. The material energy is still eternal. Universal wave function is still eternal. So how is and it's
sorry. So the catch is you cannot simply have the contraction before expansion. This is the catch. So you understand the moment of transition, right? It was contracting at some point. And then when it contracted too much, it started expanding. That's fine. The only problem is what happened before it contracted like that. It could not have been contracting forever because there is a bunch of instabilities. You can, as I said, contracting space cannot be contracting forever unless it's a very, 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 very special space. So my model resolves this issue. Before it was contracting, it was just going in a straight line. That's it. Going in a straight line here, a straight line there. When it collided, it started contracting. And then when it contracted too much, it started expanding, and then you have the Big Bang. Does it make sense?
okay. I'm hoping that I'm following you. It's not.
If you want, I could.
So what causes then what if you have space inflating? Do you have a reversal of this? Do you have something because we know that the space is not expanding slower and slower. It's going the other way. So I mean, I don't think that they attribute this to dark matter. I mean, how the universe is flying apart faster and faster. So you've got an eternal model, right? So you've got an eternal model.
Yeah, there's no counterpart to the past. That begins because of the scalar fields. So this expansion of the universe that's accelerated is very likely due to a scalar field, just like inflation itself. And all of that had to have a beginning. But it is possible to just make a mechanism for itself to have a beginning. The question is, what happens before that beginning? How does it come about? So how do you create a history that's eternal into the past and consistent? And that's where
I also have questions about what do you do after the end. I mean, the universe is flying apart. It's like everything is now too far apart from each other to ever bridge the gap, maybe even to see each other. How then do you get the eternity aspect where everything comes back around again? What is your solution to that?
It doesn't. There's no cycle.
Doesn't. Okay.
It doesn't. There's no cycle. Our best hope. That's a separate question, but.
So this is unidirectional. There was no beginning. It's future infinite, and you've got a past infinitude as well.
And they're all different. Yes.
And they're all different. Oh, I'm so confused. Somebody's going to have to take this conversation and make an animation so that I can begin to understand this.
Probably. Well, yes. Well, okay. So imagine this again. You have a tube, right? Inside of a tube, you have two things approaching each other. However far into the past you look, you just see the same two things approaching each other, whether we're just further away in time. When they finally collide, there's an explosion, the tube bulges. Okay, it bulges at the place of explosion, and it keeps bulging and expanding. So this is the easiest intuitive way you can imagine what's happening here. And it's, or here's another one. Here's an even simpler. Imagine a bomb, right, with a fuse. When the fuse stops, gets to the bomb, the fuse is burning. When it gets to the bomb explodes, right? Now imagine the fuse was just burning since forever. That's the simplest way to put my model. So there was a fuse.
Yeah, I'm still confused because you're still using it in terms of one type of explosion or another type of explosion.
When you get to classical physics, that's a model. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, we know that the Big Bang, even under classical physics, is not an explosion. I mean, it's a rapid inflation. It's something. It's like the sun. I had to explain this to people who were insisting to me that they had disproved science because there's no oxygen in space, and yet the sun is on fire. And I have to explain, well, the sun is not actually on fire. It looks like fire because it's a plasma state, but because it's not a chemical fire, it doesn't require oxygen. It's not oxidation. It's plasma. And so when you're talking about cosmic inflation, again, it looks like an explosion. It looks exactly like an explosion, just like the sun looks like it's on fire, but it's not an explosion.
You're right. The better word is expansion, not explosion.
Okay.
Yes, you're right.
Well, then, can you come up with an illustrative model that doesn't involve explosives or a bomb?
Imagine you have just the surface of a tube, right? The surface of a tube, and things moving on the surface of a tube. So you have something moving on the surface of a tube, one direction, like a bead, okay? A bead's moving on the surface of a tube in this direction and flying that direction. When they meet, they start to expand the surface of the tube. That's just how they work. That's their property. They're able to expand, inflate the surface of the tube, so it starts bulging the surface of the tube itself.
Okay. And then
it just keeps inflating, and so fast that we don't even know anymore what happens to those other remaining ends. And that's where we find ourselves, in that inflating part.
Okay, so you don't have a universe ending in heat death, right? Because you said it's infinite into the future.
Well,
but not cyclic.
It's not cyclic. It might end in a heat death, meaning that everything just flies apart and it's expanding with nothing in it. Yeah, it's more than perfectly possible.
Okay, so then how is it? Is that still considered future infinite? Because I don't think it is.
Yes, it's a future infinite. It just keeps expanding. It just keeps expanding, and that's it.
Okay, and so that would imply a finite spectrum into the past as well, because
of expansion. Yes, of expansion. The expansion began. It never ends, but it began.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, and so prior to the expansion, we're in a tube.
We're in a tube, and in the tube, we simply have one thing that doesn't know about the other one. It hasn't causally reached it. It's moving at the speed of light, doesn't know anything. And the other thing doesn't know about the first one. And the farther in the past you look, you just see them farther apart, and farther apart. And they were always flying towards each other.
Okay.
That's a very simple picture. Yep.
What I like is that you have submitted this to peer review. And so whereas I'm doing the best I can to try to wrestle with these concepts, and I just frankly can't. There's some things we have aptitude in, others we don't. I can draw pictures very well. I'm a pretty good sketch artist, but if you hand me a violin, I'm useless. So there's just some things I'm not going to be able to do. I do, however, respect that other people are going to be able to read this journal, and people who have the wherewithal to analyze this will probably come back and hopefully explain to me their impression of your paper and how they evaluated it, and whether they give a thumbs up or thumbs down. I very often have to defer to experts on matters like this.
I'll be very glad to hear more section.
So Mr. V, I think we're going to have to close. We're going to have to close this up. I'm going to give you another couple minutes to summarize, if you can.
Just a quick recap. Did you understand the basic idea with the tube and two things approaching it, and then the tube starts to expand? I think that's the best analogy.
I am not even going to lie. Did not. So I mean,
Yeah, two things approach each other and collide. They approach each other since forever. That's the basic idea here. And it is consistent there. So I just want to add that I have an extensive consistency section that analyzes all the results that I mentioned that constrain such best eternal model. There are very, very many consistency constraints. It's not so easy. That's what apologists like to do. I analyze more things, more consistency constraints than William Lane Craig and James Sinclair do in their paper. I actually do. I unearthed some results that they don't even consider, and I show how my model passes all those consistency checks.
Let's be frank. I mean, William Lane Craig is not known for. Well, not just that he's not a physicist. I mean, I've seen people of his own fold turn on him regarding his theorems, that how inconsistent they are and how absurd they are. So I wouldn't.
When you're talking about physics, yeah, philosophy, we're not even doing that. When you're talking about physics, there are citable results, like for example for Vilenke.
No, I'm talking about physics. I'm talking about his what was that thing, the Kalam cosmological argument that he came up with, the gaping holes in that, where he believes in presentism, where there is no past except when you have to have a past, so that you have presentism and the only thing that exists is the present, but you have future present and you have past present and they're all the same thing, and none of that. No, so
it's not physics. Yeah. I'm not talking about that part. I'm not talking about only the physics argument that he presents in his papers exclusively. Of course, not to us.
Yeah. Yes. Okay.
That's the point. I'm not demonstrating that there is a consistent possibility, and consistent in physics terms, of how the universe could have been eternal into the past. It's simply, however far you look, there's always 1 second before, and that's it.
Okay. Well, I understand.
Yeah.
I understand. There's a number of models that are. There are a number of models that are past infinite, but I'm a little confused. Hartle-Hawking was supposed to be one of them, and you said it's not. And when you said it had a beginning,
boundary, it doesn't have a boundary, but it has a beginning. And for example, the Carroll-Chen model, it has a boundary. Furthermore, not just a beginning, but also a boundary. So there are all these subtleties. The problem is, once you make the maximally stringent constraints, then there is not so many options that you have. And
the Carroll-Chen model, is that Sean Carroll and Jen Chen, is that different from Carroll's quantum eternity theorem? Is it?
Yes, it's
does he have, that's okay.
Theorem, yes, completely different. Carroll's quantum eternity theorem perfectly applies to a model like mine, where the universe has one direction of time, and the presentism is true, as often is, as usually assumed in quantum mechanics. And you have a state before and before and before. My model can be considered as an illustration to Carroll's eternity theorem. His own model cannot, but mine can. That's the thing. So
okay.
Because again, it really has no beginning whatsoever. There's always 1 second before, and you can describe what was happening 1 second before. And in classical terms, there is no quantum mechanical mechanism, no boundary, no quantum mechanical mechanisms. All the consistency constraints, like the Bogdan-Veklych theorem, entropy constraints, everything is cleanly followed. I'm hoping people will get more traction and more notice. Then more reviews, more discussion. I really hope of that.
Okay. Well, and we'll see the sparks fly.
Hopefully.
Yeah. All right. Well, Mr. V.
Just one thing. When I was working at Vilenkin, I wrote an email, and he confirmed that one of the crucial ingredients, the eternal stability of flat empty space, was not disproven by his results. So that gave me confidence when I was writing it. Yeah. So I had some. So yeah.
Well, hope you get more. And I would like to see some kind of I would like to see some kind of unified consensus, which. Yeah, this is the thing. So many physicists tell me that within the constraints of classical physics in general relativity, that this is how it is. However many seconds after the Big Bang, this is what we know to be true. But that's within classical classical physics in general relativity. This is without the quantum model.
There is a
I mean,
loophole. You can use the Einstein-Cartan theory instead of quantum gravity, which is classical, and then you avoid the singularity as well. This is one of the starting loopholes that my model places.
shut up. Okay. Will you shut up? All right, so let's close it up.
And
Did you have anything? Was there anything more to say?
so my model is a very, very. It uses basically every loophole possible to avoid, to assume as little as possible. That's all I can say. As a result, it's very sophisticated in the sense of perverted. It's not something you can think of like it's convoluted. It's not something natural enough. Like it was contracting then expanding. No, it's definitely more sophisticated than that. However, on the other hand, I think hope will be interest for the community period for discussion. Second, my narrow interest is for apologists to try to prove that this is wrong. Because if they cannot prove that this is wrong, whether it's true or false, if they cannot prove that this is wrong, therefore they cannot prove that God exists. Because if the universe there was always 1 second before that the world does not have a creator, because it was never created. There was always a past. There was always 1 second before. So I'm also looking into seeing what they can come up with. They have a lot of motivation to try to disprove it, so to speak. Right. So it's interesting on two fronts. The purely physical, because I hope there is actually some things that can explain. There's some, as I mentioned at the end of the paper. For example, the dark flow is poorly understood, but it's quite natural in my model, on the one hand. And on the other hand, I'm interested in seeing the reaction of the religious apologists. Because if they cannot disprove this, they cannot prove that a miracle happened, at least. So there is that logical utility.
I hear that, and I'm kind of amused at taking their out where if you can't prove it wrong, because that's what they're up to. They want to assert whatever they want to assert and say you have to disprove it.
Well, they're trying to prove that miracle happened, right? So I think the most constructive way to dissuade people from thinking that way is to give an explicit alternative where there is no miracle. Okay. And then say, okay, well, if you say the miracle has to happen, well, then how do you prove this wrong? I think that there is some value in that. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'd be amused to see that too. Again, once physicists get a hold of this, and I don't really care what the apologists say. Because apologists are just going to. It doesn't matter how well something is proven to be. It doesn't matter how demonstrable it is. It doesn't matter how verifiable it is. They're going to shove their heads in the sand and say, no, it's not. That humans and chimps don't have a common ancestor. It doesn't matter how much proof we have. They're never going to accept it.
But the crucial difference is this: when we're talking just about philosophy, it's a marsh, it's a bog, and everything can be justified. But when we're trying to do harder things than philosophy, like history and physics, it's very pleasant to be able to slam them on their heads, to put them back into the bog of philosophy.
Well, yeah, I agree with you there. All right. So, as I said, the paper is linked below. So have some fun with that. I want to hear somebody get back to me at some point on how this is doing in peer review, what the response is from other physicists and other mathematicians and so forth.
Absolutely. I'm also looking forward to that very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. V.
Thank you so much.